long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to the Politics Cast, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. My name is Will Miller, Executive Director of Institutional Analytics, Effectiveness, and Strategic Planning at Jacksonville University. And today I'm especially excited to be talking with Tom LoBianco, the author of Piety and Power, which examines Mike Pence as a politician, as a man, looks at his religious values, and a lot of very different facets than what we may get from the mainstream media and their quick coverages of Pence. Tom, I'm really excited to talk to you. Glad you had time to come on and talk with us today.
Will, thank you very much, man. That is some high praise. I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
And I'm always curious. I want to start with this question because I feel like it's the one we always want to ask, but other things always seem to get in the way and then we don't get back to it. But for you, coming from the news background and ultimately then turning towards biographies, I guess for the listeners, what's it like to write this type of book about an individual in a position of power like Mike Pence? And how does it differ from you from the day-to-day, hour-to-hour news reporting that you've also done in your career?
Sure. One of the toughest things for me initially was to being able to break out of, or trying to break out of, writing 1,000-word stories every day. And there's a great author. He's an expert on narrative nonfiction, sort of long-form journalism. His name is John Franklin. Recommend everybody who's interested in writing go out and find him. He came up with a term for this. He calls it spaghettiing, because it looks like spaghetti when you start to write without a plan. And after you hit about 2,000 words, your thoughts and the words subsequently start to look like spaghetti, like just kind of all over the place. And that was, to be honest with you, happened with me very often at the beginning of this process. And beyond just the writing, in terms of the reporting, it was really important that I'd be able to break free of sort of the day-to-day minutia of working for The Wire, the minute-by-minute stuff, staff moves, items like that. So I really wanted to go back and understand Pence's religion, his conversion from Catholic to evangelical, and how that played, what the interplay of that was in his politics and his public life, and frankly, that's not the type of thing you can do as your standard beat reporter. It requires going out and spending a lot of time sitting down with sources for 2-3 hours at a time. That's like I think if I sat down for 3 hours with anybody, I think that the impeachment narrative would flip on its head 5 times, and I'd come out of the interview and would be totally confused as to where we were.
Absolutely understand. So I think that is an interesting dynamic because, as you read it, the depth you have to get into, especially as you sort of hit on all of the different facets of Pence that I feel like are oftentimes not viewable to the public. But obviously for you, knowing Pence before the White House and having that opportunity to look at Pence when he was still in Indiana, when he was still serving the state, when he was still making these types of decisions. I guess one of the first questions for Pence himself is, would you have expected Mike Pence to end up in this place? And again, especially now, with impeachment hearings being formally launched and everything else going on around it, literally a few steps from the presidency here, what would you have said to that concept when you first started covering Pence?
I never saw it initially. I never expected him to make it to the White House, to either make a run in his own right. And I couldn't. I'll tell you specifically, his team shielded that from us when we were covering him day to day as governor, and that was very much on purpose. I guess I just didn't. I could not see it in the moment. And, I pulled back on this, and the ambition was there. And here he is. it was, I guess, initially it was surprising to me. I think that at the start of this project, but now it's not. I mean, it's not terribly surprising at all. And I used to hear that too. You hear people refer to him as ambition in a suit. All these other kind of flip phrases regarding him, and a lot of things that people used to dismiss politicians generally. And I dismissed those arguments because I just didn't. I didn't see it, and I'm not, and I don't. I'm not entirely sure that he is ambition in a suit. And let me point to a key change that we see in his life that I think highlights this. There's some people talk about how he believes he was predestined to become president, and about how he's been running for president since he was a child. I guess in some way, it's true of any politician. But I did not really see a major change in his trajectory until 2008. And that's when movement conservatives, the Council for National Policy, started coming to him saying, we want you to run for president. And then from there, and consider that for a second. That's a very intoxicating brew right there. Having somebody come to you and say, Will, I want you to run for president to carry our torch. And I think that really, you see a change in Pence's dynamic in how he handles things and how he approaches politics from there on out. And everything becomes more playing the long game, focusing on running for president. But before that, I don't think it was not focused that way before 2008.
That's what it seems like. I mean, it's one where I feel like Pence's name always came up, a relatively stable governor, a state that was either swing or on the fringe of being swing. And again, being able to reach out to a certain dynamic within the base, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today at some point. But from a personal side, I guess, too, because obviously you've noted this kind of change. The one thing I think a lot of people always think about Pence, and if I walked onto my campus right now and asked people what they know about Mike Pence outside of he's the vice president or something similar to that, a lot of them are going to talk about homosexuality. They're going to talk about religion. They're going to talk about the conversion camps. What can you share about what you learned and discovered about Pence and his religion, Pence and what motivates him and pushes him, and whether that public portrayal's accurately fitting what he is?
Yeah, as with a lot of politicians, public figures, I think he's beset by caricatures. And when I interviewed some of his friends, they pointed out to me that those caricatures ironically help him. And that might be why they don't always shoot it down. I mean, if he's going for a conservative base of voters, especially trying to hold down sort of Christian right, the whatever current iteration of the moral majority, the Christian coalition, that type of world, it frankly politically it helps them to have the mainstream media, New York press, whatever, referring to him as an anti-gay bigot. So politically, that's in his benefit. I found that I did not see hate in his handling of things. As I looked into his religion, into his faith, it became clear to me that much of his practice is separate from his politics. And he does not always kind of cleanly align with the televangelists in this world, sort of like the Pat Robertson, the people like Ralph Reeder, the politicized version of that world. And I found that it's sort of, he doesn't really do a lot to dissuade this notion that he's a Christian right culture warrior, but there are limits on it. And I think when he was governor, that's a very good example of him. Remember, look at the religious freedom battle in 2015. This is a really good marker for understanding him. When he runs for governor in 2012, he kind of drops the culture warrior thing. And he'd been doing that in Washington, and part of that is because it was successful for him in Washington. But he runs for governor as sort of the second Mitch Daniels 2.0. There's a Republican technocrat, somebody who sort of eschews um, the social, religious, conservative type policies. He certainly drops the abortion stuff. I remember, and this was a political decision on their part. I remember in a campaign stop in August of 2012 at Marian University in the northwest side of Indianapolis. He's talking about education and workforce development, which is, I mean, you talk about dry, hands-on, technocratic policy, and not social, hot-button issues.
That's the epitome of bureaucracy right there.
Right? So a couple of us asked him questions about, okay, if you get a bill that limits, abortions to 20 weeks, or I forget the exact number, but we're trying to find out if he wants to shrink the window in which people can have abortions in the state, and that's certainly a big drive, nationally among social and religious conservatives, pro-life groups, and he kind of dodges it at first. He says, oh, where my stance is on this issue. I think everyone's very well aware. And if something that's pro-life legislation comes across my desk, I'm going to sign it. His press secretary shuts off all questioning immediately. She says, okay, final question, we're leaving. Which had never happened before. I mean, it's a governor's race, right? I mean, you never get, I never got that before. It was very stunning. A couple days later, a few of us noticed that they're posting, the campaign is posting campaign events to Facebook and Twitter, and they're sending out press releases of events that happened the day before, but they never told us about. And they basically play hide the ball with him. They play hide the ball with us until the election, because they're trying very hard to get away from the culture warrior, the social crusader, however you want to put it, image that he'd crafted. Now, does he entirely change from that? No. It's like any human. It's not, the core principles of him have not changed. It's just, what he decides to emphasize. And what happens is that in 2015, they have this religious freedom battle in Indiana, and religious freedom is that, they say, they can deny services to same-sex couples in weddings. It appears to be highly discriminatory. Supporters say it's absolutely not. Interestingly enough, Pence was so focused on running for president that he did not have a very good sense of the headwinds on this issue. The year before, they had failed to pass and this is a Republican-controlled state house. They failed to pass a ban on same-sex marriage, a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage, and the issue was more or less over. And basically, Pence tells one of his advisors this. He says, really just want to wait and see what the Supreme Court has to say on it. Which, if you think about it, that's not an answer that you get from a fiery theocrat. That's the answer that you get from somebody who is fairly pragmatic on the issue. I mean, clearly he doesn't support same-sex marriage, and that's not his stance. But he also is acknowledging of where the country is moving and the way the law is moving on it. So by 2015, some of the legislative leadership in the state comes up with this idea of it's a consolation prize to the religious right, the Christian right lobbyist in the state for not having gotten them the same-sex marriage ban. And this is this religious freedom law. And Pence has nothing to do with it. He's not dialed in with it. He doesn't put it together. He doesn't whip votes for it. He doesn't do anything with it. He's just like zero until the last minute. After this thing is passed and it's on its way to his desk, and there have been no protests, there's been no outpouring of whatever about it, he decides that it's safe to pop his head up and take ownership of it. He's going to take credit for it. Ronald Reagan used to say that success has a thousand fathers, and failure is an orphan, right? So here he is in this case, one of 1,000 fathers, and they hold this bill signing. You get religious types in there, and almost overnight, this is at the end of March 2015, almost overnight, this issue just explodes. You get this massive national backlash, which he never saw coming. And I think that kind of gets to more of his nature. As I said earlier about the caricatures of him and why they don't put those to rest. Politically, he needs that Christian right base if he's going to run in a Republican primary. That's kind of his thing. But the flip side of that, and you see this in as he's positioning himself for president, potential run for president in 2016, he has to build out his network of national donors. And a lot of these mega donors are not particularly hot on social issues. And in particular, one of them, Paul Singer, the one who eventually ended up backing Marco Rubio and funded the basis of what would become the Steele dossier. Singer calls him up after he's dug in March and April of 2015 and tells Pence, you need to sign the fix to this bill, clarifying that it doesn't discriminate against LGBT residents, or I won't give you any money.
And that's a statement.
Yeah. Yes, they had been working on Paul Singer, billionaire, New York Republican mega donor. They had been working on him for years. The Pence's people had been working on him for years to try and bring him into the fold. And Singer's son had come out. Singer's son had come out of the closet a few years earlier, and Singer kind of came around to being pro-LGBT on this issue. It made it a pet cause. He's a pro-LGBT Republican, and really, you see in that moment, that week, the end of March 2015, the beginning of April 2015, you see the tug and pull between Pence and his principles and Pence and his ambition, and he really is torn between it. If I had, I would love. He didn't want to sit down for this book. He didn't. He hasn't talked for any other books that have been written about him. He won't talk for profiles. That's just his policy. Obviously, as a reporter, I hope he changes that policy. If I probably have 1,000 questions for him, but
I can imagine at this point, especially. I mean, and again, I think it's always interesting when folks won't sit down and talk. And as I read this, there were times where I was kind of trying to imagine, like, if I'm Mike Pence reading this, how do I feel? And I'll share with listeners, the one thing I'll say is, I mean, I feel if nothing else, the book's fair to Mike Pence. And I think it's incredibly fair in terms of calling out some of these, and you use the word pandering here. When there's pandering, it's pandering. Doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean it's bad. It is what it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's incredibly interesting to see that juxtaposition between when am I pandering, when I'm not. And what I think what's so interesting on Pence and why I wanted to start with the religion question to some degree was because religion is the one thing that's incredibly difficult to pander about, especially when the assumptions and the caricatures about Pence put it in such one direction. And I know in the book you talk a lot about some of the allegories that folks use that know Pence about his allegiance to Trump. And I know that, we talk about favorite verse and sort of what that means to him and how you saw that progress over time. You want to share a little bit about that as part of the religion conversation too?
Absolutely. One, thank you, Will. That means a lot to me. I really, it's a tough time in politics and covering politics, and increasingly with the president as it is, they try to pull the reporters into the middle of things, and sometimes you can't avoid that. They revoked Jim Acosta's press pass at the White House. Well, now you're in the news. I think for a lot of us, we prefer not to be in the news because you want to be an honest broker for all parties, so that you can get as much information as possible. So that really, thank you. That is really a huge compliment, man, and that means a lot to me because the best I could do as a journalist is just try to give as much as possible. Look, I really want to try and find. I really do want to try and find, what are the big threads in his life? What are the big items that kind of drive him? But you also need to do that through facts. You need to do that through anecdotes, things that you can point to. And sometimes you can't, you just can't say what it is, right? You can't write that, oh, this guy's is going to be an autocrat, a theocrat, whatever. Or you can't write that he's just, an empty suit. It's not really for me to say. Those are exaggerations. It's really, and he's a human. He's more nuanced than that. We're all humans. Now he's a very ambitious human, which is for sure. I'll tell you, one of his friends pointed out to me, and this is a very good. This to me was a very interesting thought. I hadn't really thought of it that way before. He said, so what if Mike Pence has ambition? Every human has ambition. He said that his pastor pointed out to him once that, yes, you have your ambition. Why wouldn't you have ambition? But use it for good things. And obviously, that now when you move into what is a good thing, then that becomes a subjective assessment. Then we start getting into political battles, policy battles, and whatnot. But the very fact of him, as you pointed out, of him just having ambition is not terribly, it's not inherently bad, negative, good, positive, whatever. It's sort of what happens, what comes to that. So you asked the question about his religion, and one of the things that was really interesting to me, and this is sort of it's some of the cognitive dissonance that people see sometimes with, here's Mike Pence, a very godly evangelical Christian, standing next to Donald Trump, thrice married, cheated multiple times on multiple wives, has sex with a porn star, talks about molesting women, just by all accounts, not a godly man. There are two allegories that Pence's friends and aides kind of use to explain him, and they're both from the Old Testament. One is the story of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, the Persian emperor, sort of the mad tyrant, as comes out later. And Daniel is enlisted by Nebuchadnezzar to interpret his dreams. It comes out in the dreams that that all these empires, these pagan empires, these heathen empires, will fall, and a great mountain will rise, and that mountain will be the empire of Jehovah, of God, of the Jewish God. And in this case, in this time in the Bible, the Jews are living in exile in Babylon, and Daniel is commanded to be faithful to his God, but also help Nebuchadnezzar and advise Nebuchadnezzar and be loyal to him. It's sort of the idea of keeping the country on the rails. The other allegory is Joseph and the Pharaoh. Joseph's son Abraham, his brothers sell him into slavery. They're very jealous. They got a special coat from his father. They sell him into slavery to the Pharaoh, and he rises to become an advisor to the Pharaoh, much the same way as Daniel, and he interprets coming plagues for the Pharaoh to protect the nation writ large, the whole of Egypt and his people who are there, to protect them and basically keep the country on the tracks. And
he's an economic planner almost. I mean, in reality, it's
yeah, sure, exactly. So
don't eat too much now. Drought's coming.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, in both these cases, what was interesting to me, at least, is that it's casting Trump as the tyrant and Pence as the godly servant. And one thing that's a theme throughout all of this is that it's not for man to ask what God's plans are. All right, it's not for him to question why it is the way it is. Check in and see what God has in plan, but don't question what the answer is. And that's kind of is sort of a let go and let God type of answer to things. And I think if you take that approach to things, it certainly helps explain some of these moments where Trump makes fun of Pence, kind of insinuates that he's gay. At the 2018 Gridiron dinner, like this really demeaning moments in the presidency, in this their time together in the White House. But And I think that, but I think take it out of the politics for a second. I think that helps explain the person and the faith. If you can have patience and kind of let things roll off your back, it helps to have some guidance for it. And I think that really it helps explain why he is where he is and how he survives in that position.
I agree, and I think that's a perfect kind of segue into how did he find himself in this position. One of my favorite parts in the book, and it's the one quote I do want to share with the readers. It's about the exchange and the actual act of Pence becoming Trump's VP. And it's in the book, and you say that the Trump is explaining after Pence asks him to kind of expand on something, and Trump asks him why he should be the running mate. Trump says, "I need killers. Do you want this thing or not?" Trump pressed Pence, and Pence batted him aside. "I don't need this." "Why are you going through the process?" Trump asked. Pence replied, "You're in my home. You tell me." And I think that's such an interesting dynamic to think about on this, where it's Trump is there saying, I want you to be VP, but I want to feel like you're asking me to be my VP, so let me make you grovel even though I'm the one who showed up. And it seems to suggest so much. And then you share a lot about how we ultimately got to the public announcement. Do you want to expand on that a little bit in terms of what that initial relationship building was? Because being honest, when you read it in the book, I'm like, well, this is a disastrous start to a partnership, but it seems to work somehow.
Well, it's really stunning. Here's some context and try to understand this. Pence and Trump didn't have a relationship before this. Their relationship had, at this point in the middle of July 2016, had lasted maybe like 2 weeks, and very tentative, right? And Pence was not the top pick in this moment, but according to my reporting, Newt Gingrich was the top selection. Jared and Ivanka liked him, and he was acceptable to Jared. That's kind of the reason that Chris Christie was blocked, because he helped put Kushner's father in jail. So that was always sort of the non-starter.
Well, and also, I mean, you mentioned in the book, there's even a point where Ivanka herself is floated, at least by Trump. But still, I mean, it tells you where this is at.
Well, that's right. And very early, or in the early stages of that, once it becomes clear they're going to get the nomination, which, by the way, is late in the game in 2016. It's not like, Mitt Romney or one of these other things where they lock it up pretty early in the, in like March or something. It's very late in the game. Yeah. And Ivanka was floated. His advisors kind of sat him down gently afterwards. And they're like, well, look, it's probably going to raise some serious nepotism questions. We might want to move on to some other ideas.
Other idea.
Yeah, any other idea. That's right. So what happens is that the middle of July 2016, what happens is the plane breaks down in Indianapolis. That's what gets you to that point where they have this brass tacks meeting at the governor's mansion that Wednesday morning. So that when they have that meeting in the governor's mansion, that's the one that absolutely, it opens the door for Pence. And this is like, okay, Trump is starting to respect him. He thinks maybe this guy is more than just somebody who's going to lose his reelection. He starts to, take him more seriously. But so that night, he actually calls up Pence at 6:30 that night and offers him the job. He says, and Pence says, yes, absolutely, yes, absolutely. And they think they got it. Thursday, the next day, July 14th, 2016, they're going to fly out to Manhattan to Trump Tower. It's going to be a big announcement. Chris Christie catches wind of this, and specifically when Pence's plane is going to fly to Teterboro, New Jersey, and the state troopers alert the governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, and Christie calls up Trump and he says, "Donald, what is this?" He says, "If you want to pick him, that's fine. Just tell me." Trump hates confrontation, personal, direct confrontation. And we've seen this, right? He likes to fire people over Twitter, not in person. So he says, "Oh, no, we're not. Nothing's final, Chris. Come on, no, nothing's final. Just wait. You and Mary Pat, be ready. Just be ready." And he's like, "Well, yeah, we're ready right now. Let's come on." And he's like, Trump's like, "Yeah, don't worry. Come on, watch TV tonight. You'll see something, okay?" So Trump goes on Greta Van Susteren that night. And there's been a terror attack in France, the Nice terror attack. And he goes on Greta Van Susteren. They're talking largely about the attack, and then later in the interview, she brings up, that hey, it sounds like Mike Pence is going to be your running mate. And this is Thursday, July 14th, 6 or 7 p.m. And Trump says, "Oh no, well, look, nothing's final. I got 3 great picks right now: Newt Gingrich, Chris Christie, and Mike Pence. They're all great picks. Nothing's decided yet, though." So Pence's people see this, and they've already canceled the public rollout at that point. The Trump campaign canceled the public rollout. That was supposed to happen that night when he was on Greta Van Susteren. And they say, well, what's this? Are you backing out? Like, what's this all about? And Trump and Paul Manafort tell him, "Oh, guys, don't worry. Everything's fine. Don't worry. We're just telling them that, look, we want to be respectful of the victims of the terrorist attack. Don't worry. Everything's fine." He's like, "Look, we're going to do the announcement on Saturday." And they're like, "Well, we can't do Saturday because Friday, July 15th at noon, Pence has to be legally off the ticket for governor of Indiana to legally run for vice president under the state law." And they have to, they got this, the forms prepared. They're going to deliver them to the Secretary of State's office. So it gets to Friday. There's a hard deadline for Pence. There's no hard deadline for Trump, really. I mean, the only hard deadline is the convention. And even then, they might be able to flout it. The hard deadline for Pence is the statutory deadline. That's noon on Friday, July 15th. So it gets down to 11 a.m. on Friday, July 15th, 2016. And they still don't have a firm answer that Pence is from Trump and Manafort that they're going to make this announcement publicly. So Marty Obst and Nick Ayers, the chief political aides for Pence, they decide they have to leverage an answer out of Trump to protect the Pences. They're protecting the people they work for. They protect Mike Pence, Karen Pence,
and their own. I mean, everybody's hurt if they wait and then he pulls some move.
Exactly. They pick up on a sort of a fundamental truism of Trump, which is that his word doesn't mean anything unless you make it mean something. And because you've already heard him promise to different people that they're going to be VP, so they call up Trump and Manafort, and they say, look, you have to support. So you have to publicly announce Mike Pence as your running mate, or we're backing off and we're running him for re-election as governor. And like, it freaks them out, right? This is like this is stunning. And they say, well, then Trump and Manafort, they're like, well, what do you need us to do? They're like, well, just announce it publicly. Just like say it so that we feel comfortable. And they're like, well, okay, can we tweet it? They're like, yes, tweet it. So at 11 a.m.
It's the Trump way.
It is the Trump way, right? Exactly. So at 11 a.m. on Friday, July 15th, he tweets the announcement that Pence is his running mate. Details to come on Saturday, and that's how it happened. It happens with leverage and a threat, and to me, I mean, one, it's brilliant. It's brilliant politics, but two, it's just very telling of like how things work in Trump's orbit. Is as much as this is a book about Pence and how he got there. To me, it was more telling about how Trump.
Yeah, I agree. I think it says a lot about Trump, and not just Trump, but his entire team. And I think we've seen this not just in the lead up, but I think we've seen it in the governing as well. I mean, I don't think this hasn't rectified itself or stopped. So I think we know that.
That's right. That's right.
And Tom, I've appreciated your time. Are there any last things you want to make sure that potential readers and our listeners know about the book before we sign off and let them hopefully get to ordering?
Look, everyone's going to focus on the Trump items, a lot of the current stuff, and that's important. I spent a lot of time on that because it's timely, it's newsy. But if you can, take the time to read through his early career, because especially his early congressional races, first 2 congressional races, 1988 and 1990, I think that will help you understand how he operates now. it's a formative. Both of those races, the back-to-back congressional races, are a very formative experience for him, and I think that you can see a lot of his raw character uh, before he's put the gloss on it, before he's hidden himself away, and I think that it helps explain a lot later in his career. So, see to your listeners, and fortunately, you guys are politics junkies like myself. So I think that I probably convince you to get into some old races.
Oh yeah,
and
that's an easy sell, and it was informative for me. I mean, there was stuff in there that I had no idea about, so I was glad to see that included in the book as well. Well, thank you, Tom, for joining us. For all of our listeners, it's been Tom LoBianco, the author of Piety and Power: Mike Pence and the Taking of the White House. It's available now, and I cannot more strongly advocate that you go out and read this book and learn as much as you can about our current vice president, and depending on how impeachment goes, possibly our next president. So we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out. Well, thanks again to Tom for joining us and sharing the information about his book. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We hope you liked what you heard. Listener support is what keeps the show going, and we truly appreciate it. When you become a monthly sustaining supporter of the show on Patreon, you get not only our gratitude, but also a supporters exclusive bonus episode every week. Supporters at various levels can get additional bonuses like Politics Guys gear, access to a special supporters-only Facebook group, etc. To learn more, go to patreon.com/politicsguys or visit the support page on our website, politicsguys.com/support. Subscribing to the show also really helps, as does sharing episodes. We know that word of mouth is the best advertising, so please, we always appreciate sharing with family and friends what we're doing. Leaving reviews and ratings on whatever podcast app you use also helps. If you have questions, comments, corrections, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. And our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post throughout the week is facebook.com/politicsguyspage. We're also on Twitter at politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Moreno, Andrew Masker, and Daniel Toe. This show is produced by Will Miller. We'll be back with a new episode on Saturday, and we hope you'll join us then.